And I'm so delighted to have met Greg Gonzales. He is the Commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions. You have his bio in your brochure here. And all I'll say is he is another wonderful graduate from the University of Tennessee, from the law school there. So will you please join me in giving a warm welcome to Greg Gonzales. Thank you so much, Greg.
Well, it's great to be here with all of you. Need to give a shout out in particular to Representative Kiesling, who is a great friend and provides oversight of our department. So it's always good to see Representative Kiesling, and he's a great friend to all of us here and what he does. And I really do appreciate him, and thank you for what you do. And I really did, first of all, I just want to say thanks to all of you. I mean, there's so many different agencies and advocates that are here. I just want to tell you, thank you for putting this conference together, for the information that's been provided. I have learned a lot just in a short period of time, and I did want to say thank you for that. Here's one of the reasons why I wanted to be here today. When I came into the department last century in the mid-1980s, I didn't really hear a lot about elder exploitation at that time, but from a personal experience, my mother took care of my grandparents for some time, including financial matters, and I watched that. 40 years later, I'm doing the same thing for my mother, just as many of you have done, are doing, will be doing. And every time I do something, sit down with an advisor, with my mother, we talk about some of the things that are important to her. I think about this. I think about what we all do and the importance of it. So I just wanted to let you know that this is important to me personally, and I'm really grateful that I have a chance to be here and talk to you. So here's what we do. Here's our jurisdiction. And let me get into some issues that I think will be of interest to you. We regulate state banks, state credit unions, non-deposit trust companies, and hundreds of non-bank entities like payday lenders, money transmitters that I know that have probably have crossed your path at some point in time. So one of the things I wanted to do today was give maybe just a little bit of an assessment of what I see, what we see as a department coming out of the new state law, that of course is not still very fresh. A lot of folks are doing a lot of things to be able to take advantage of the tools that are provided. So one of the things that I wanted to mention to you all was that I feel good about the direction that financial institutions have taken under this state law. There will always be more to be done. There's always more that we can do as a department, as a state. But I wanted to give you some insight as to what we see and what we hear with regard to what institutions are doing. I think one of the reasons, and think about this, one of the reasons that I think institutions, financial institutions, are doing well is that we are a state essentially of community banks, community-based institutions, credit unions that are community-based. When you have that kind of a business model, then you're going to rely on relationship banking. For institutions that don't treat customers well and don't know them well, then the business model really doesn't work. There is a great incentive in a community-based institution to be able to take care of all of their customers, and in particular the most vulnerable. And I'm going to give you some ways that we see that that's happening. I also think that a dialogue that has been happening, and I've been a part of that, and we've seen some things all across the state. Just recently got on the road meeting bankers from 6 towns that I visited, and we talked a little bit about this. So I'm going to share some of the things that we've been hearing. First of all, when you look at the state law, this is what the state law specifically says with respect to our department. It said the Department of Financial Institutions is encouraged within existing public or private resources to consult with financial service providers as defined in this Act, the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability, the Department of Human Services, to consider distributing public education and information to alert the public to the dangers posed to elderly and vulnerable adults by financial exploitation. So this is what we did in response to that request of the state law. We brought together these stakeholders, Commission on Aging, APS, the Attorney General's Office, the Tennessee Bankers Association, I know they're represented here, Tennessee Credit Union League, they may be represented here. We brought all of those folks together last fall. We had meetings. Let me give you just a taste of some of the information that came out of that. For instance, we invited the Tennessee Consumer Finance Association. That's the association that represents about 1,000 locations of finance companies in Tennessee. We asked them, what do you see? That association told us last year that they don't see a lot of issues in this regard. They don't have a lot of elderly individuals that are members, but one of the things that they're looking for, one of the things that they might be concerned about, is if someone who's not eligible for a loan then seeks to get a senior citizen to co-sign for a loan. So that's something that we're watching out for. Then the money transmitter industry, companies like Western Union, American Express, all the way down to mom and pops that may be licensed in Tennessee. You know, they're taking money from one location, they transmit it to a second one electronically, or they may be issuing a money order or a traveler's check. So we invited some of the leading companies in the country to meet with us. So we had leadership, and we were very grateful to get these people to come. We had leadership from Western Union and from MoneyGram, their risk management offices, to come to Nashville and meet with our group. We had American Express on the phone. Some of the things they talked about were this. They talked about the training of agents and staff, such as at stores like Walmart, the use of the data that they collect from their transactions to develop rules and revise their internal procedures. They talked about thousands of potential fraudulent transfers on a monthly basis, and that they're able to stop a majority of these before customer harm ever takes place. They talked about the fraud monitoring that they have, the review transactions, the analysis, the referrals that they make to law enforcement. They have kiosks that provide prompts to customers to give them additional warning before they engage in a transaction. And that prompt is also on on paper forms as well. At this meeting, we also asked our financial institutions, what's your readiness? What's your ability to be able to take the new state law and deploy under it appropriately? You know, the Tennessee Credit Union League talked to us about forming an internal committee. They reviewed different materials to be used for training, to be made available to credit unions and the general public. The Tennessee Bankers Association surveyed the entire industry to find out about readiness, and a great number of those, what they had done, the developing of policies and the procedures that they're implementing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the overview was from what the General Assembly asked us to do in bringing together these various groups. You know, we weren't there to tell them what to do. We were trying to just get a conversation started so that everybody understood where people were, and then we could go forward working together. Now let me give you a little bit of some insight as to what's happening in the banking and credit union communities. And I wanted to start out with an example of a story that a bank president gave to me this year. And I appreciated the bank president doing it. And the reason being is that you want to have the tone set at the top. We want to see, when we're looking at risk management, we want to be able to see that leadership is actually leading the way, and they're not just delegating these issues to someone down in the institution. So here's the story quickly. At one of the branches of this bank, they had a customer come in, a senior citizen, who told the teller, "I want to withdraw everything in my checking account, everything in my savings account." And of course, as you can imagine, the teller got suspicious. It doesn't happen. I mean, certainly it happens. You're closing down an account. But the teller became suspicious, asked the customer, "Now, what's the purpose of this?" The customer said, "I have a cousin who has gotten into financial trouble, so I need to pull everything that I've got out of this institution to help them." The teller was not necessarily satisfied with that, continued with the questioning and asked, "Well, is this cousin that's in financial trouble, is this cousin going to be able to pay you back? Because you're taking out everything that you have from our institution." The answer was not very satisfactory. At that point, the teller brings in the office manager. The office manager takes the customer to a private area and begins further discussions in a kind way, a polite way. Didn't want her just to walk out. After that kind of conversation, though, the customer said, "I just want my money, I just want to leave." So the office manager said, "We're going to cut the tickets. We're going to draw up the tickets here. We're going to get your withdrawal. But let me tell you a story before you take your money, and we may never see you again." So the office manager talked about a mother-in-law, her mother-in-law that had a situation where two people came up to her with a bag of money and said, "We have just found this bag of money. We'd like to include you into this. So before we provide it to the authorities, all three of us are going to add some money to this so that the amount is not going to be recognized by whoever might claim it." So the mother-in-law said, "Okay, well, count me in on that." She was able to scrounge up $12,000, provided it to those two individuals, and the mother-in-law never saw them again, of course. So humiliated. She didn't report this to the appropriate authorities for days, and by then it was too late. So at that point, getting back to our current situation, the customer sitting in this office said, she was listening intently, and she said, I just need my money and I need to go." So they gave her the money. The teller, though, as she was walking out, said, "Here's my card. Call me if you still have more questions or you just want to talk." That night, this individual called the teller and said, "You have convinced me, you and your office manager. I know now that I was going to be taken advantage of. I would have lost my life savings. Thank you, bank, for protecting me and saving my life savings." I love that story. I'm glad to be able to tell it to you. The thing that really made an impression upon me was the persistence, and they had to do it in a diplomatic way, not to cause that individual to just lose faith in the institution, but to be able to listen and to be able to understand what she was being told, and ultimately it made a difference. And that customer is grateful. We're grateful as a banking system for that example. Let me mention to you something from the credit union side of things. They had a 95-year-old member, this credit union did, early stages of dementia. And a telephone scam artist was on this 95-year-old in a big way. She had given to the scam artist $100,000 through gift cards, wire transfers, and checks, and the 95-year-old lived alone. But because of the new state law, and I appreciate those of you that had a part in this, because of the new state law, this credit union was able to use the trusted person contact provision to contact a son in another state to let them know, you need to come here, your mother's in difficulty, already $100,000 out the door. He got in the car, he came to the credit union to protect his mother. They actually got to an institution that was holding one of the checks that was going through the system. contacted the bank put a hold on it immediately and got a few $1,000s back for that 95-year-old. So the bank and that credit union initially working together under the provisions of this state law. That was another great story. One more with regard to process that I wanted to tell you about. Each of these stories has a lesson behind it. The first one was the persistence. The second one was the trusted contact provision under the new state law. This one is with regard to process, where employees of this bank are trained in various ways, including if documents are presented, they're going to present that to their lawyers. And one of the things that happens there is if there's someone who is looking to do something inappropriately, once the lawyers get involved in looking at those documents, it tends to cause them to think about going the other way. This particular bank is doing a lot on training. They want to take advantage of the new federal law that gives immunity there. One of the things they do in training, and it's not because of the federal law, but because of the Bank Secrecy Act, where all institutions are having to go through a lot of Bank Secrecy Act training, currency transaction report training. It's part of the mandatory Bank Secrecy Act effort that every bank and credit union has to go through. That helps in this situation tremendously with respect to elder abuse. But let me paraphrase a comment that this banker made that I wanted to share with you. He simply said to me, you know, we're making a lot of progress. He thinks the industry's making progress. He appreciates law enforcement, everybody that they work through. His hope, as he told me, was that he hopes this whole effort somehow doesn't get lodged into some kind of bureaucratic government program. And the reason that he said that was his employees are so enthused about being able to deploy some of the training, to be able to look after some of the senior citizens that they're really focused on, that they don't want to lose sight of that. They don't want this to turn into a checklist effort just to make sure that they take care of the examiners. I know how that goes. I've been doing this for over 32 years. I know what it means when examiners go into an institution. I know what it means if we are focusing institutions, and whatever issue it is, regulation can be distracting. It can cause institutions to awkwardly do things they wouldn't do naturally to satisfy a government agency rather than serving their customers. And so we as a department look for that happy balance. We're trying to ensure safety and soundness, compliance with the law, protecting consumers, while at the same time being mindful that banks are meant to serve all of you and the people of this state. We try to find that happy balance to allow them to do that. In this case, to allow them to serve senior citizens and not serve examiners. That's one of the things that we work towards, and I think the banker loves to hear this. Now, let me give you really quickly here some thoughts from another banker that had gone through a process dealing with an abuse case. He came up with a few takeaways from that he wanted me to share with you all because he knew I was coming here. And this is what he's sharing with other bankers as well. 4 things. First of all, bankers need to be wise, but they need to be bold in dealing with potential abuse. Secondly, people that are supposedly representing the bank client are likely to be aggressive and they're likely to be demanding. So banker, be prepared and don't yield to pressure. Be wise, but don't yield. Third, our bankers consistently stated before we took any action that we wanted our legal counsel to review the documents that are being presented. That buys time. It also sends a signal to anybody who seeks to do something wrong that you're going to be scrutinized. And then finally, whenever possible, particularly for our community-based institutions, if they know the family, make a note of that. Be prepared to call a trusted person in that family to let them know if you have suspicions. Those are 4 things that I thought were tremendous. Let me wind up with this issue, and it deals with online banking. I recently sat down with a bank here in East Tennessee, a great banker, a long heritage of banking in that family, and they talked to me about what they see is something they didn't think they would see: senior citizens getting involved with respect to online services, particularly online banking. They didn't think they would see that, but now they're seeing it. Here's just a few things very quickly. Because the bank offers self-enrollment for most of these services, it can be a challenge at times for bankers or for credit unions to spot red flags. They run a daily report in this bank looking at these self-enrollments, online enrollments. Then what they do is they cross-check that with respect to what they have in their system otherwise, looking for anything that's a red flag or something abnormal. They might not note an individual's age as being a red flag, but what they would note is if there's an online enrollment and an email address is used that is not the email of the customer, that is a red flag. That's going to call for a follow-up call, and they do that. Now, it may be that the senior citizen, the customer, says, you know what? I've intentionally given this person a different email address, responsibility under this account. That's fine. But it may be something else, and they just want to make sure. What concerns us even more about seniors and online access, of course, is the extent to the way that scammers are targeting senior citizens, particularly because of lack of understanding of technology, the various scams that are circulating. You kind of wrap it up by saying something like this. This is a good observation. Who of us here would go to our local bank, find a stranger off the street, take that stranger with you to the bank, allow them to have access to your balance, to your deposits, to who you've written checks to? Who would do that? No one would do that. But yet, when a senior citizen or anybody gets an online account and provides the password and the access to that account, it's the same thing. And that's what we've got to make sure that we let folks understand what's happening. This bank, when things like that occur, they are able to counsel individuals as to what this information means that you now have access to online, and the dangers that can occur when that information is provided to others. And so I really appreciated this bank for doing that. I'm going to wind it up right there. And once again, I want to leave you with this. There's a lot of work happening in the financial services sector. We see that as a regulator. We're working with the Tennessee Bankers Association and Tennessee Credit Union League to share information. There's a lot of good practices that are being shared. This information on online banking was something that I had not heard a lot about. I appreciate what this bank is bringing to the table. Others are doing the same. So we're all moving forward. We need to just have a continued dialogue about these issues. We're learning things new, it seems like, all the time. I'd love to have a dialogue with any of you and with some of our institutions in this state and just see how we can push these issues forward. Not in a one-size-fits-all approach, but allowing institutions to do what's best. They know their customers, they know their community. We're allowing them to be innovative within the parameters of what's safe and sound. I'll leave it there. Thank you for having me here, and I hope I get to come back again sometime. Thank you.